Thank you, everybody. Thank you. If you could take your seats. My name is Jason Wassell. I'm the Chief Executive of the Consumer Credit Trade Association, and I'm your host for this session. I just wonder if I could ask my panelists to join me on stage.
We are.
Sounds like a few people have been paid to clap at the front, professional clappers.
Hecklers.
I think everybody will agree. It's been a great event, lots of different panels. I think at one point, there were at least 2 or 3 that I was interested to go to at the same time. So I know that a lot of people are running around. Some great panels, but I think in terms of topics, then this is probably the top topic that's facing financial services and consumer credit just now. And it's only right, therefore, that we have the best panel and the best set of speakers on stage. And I might just ask them to introduce themselves very quickly because we've got a limited amount of time. But just a quick introduction, because I've done this before and I've promoted somebody and demoted others whilst introducing them. So Eric, let's start with you.
Thank you. So I'm Eric Leans. I'm the MD responsible for personal finance at UK Finance. I'm also the board champion, the vice chair of risk at a small building society, and I'm a non-executive at Registry Trust Limited.
Okay, that's quite a lot. I'm Robert McKechnie. I'm the product director for our consumer product lines, our ID, fraud and compliance product lines in Equifax. And to make it fun, I also look after our strategic alliances partnerships.
And I'm Desmond McNamara. I'm the Chief Risk Officer for Zilch. We're a FCA-regulated firm, and along with my ExCo colleagues, we're jointly responsible for the implementation of Consumer Duty.
And I think as we have done all day, I think I would point you towards Slido for questions. Just to get us started, though, I have a couple of questions just to kind of get the conversation going. And I guess to get us all on the same page so that we know where we're coming from. I'm going to come to you, Eric. I mean, how did we get here? How did the Consumer Duty develop? And maybe to be looking a little bit, bring it right up to date, I think, how are firms responding to that challenge?
Yeah, so I think to be fair, we saw this coming. We knew it was coming, and actually we could go back to TCF. Interestingly, we did a bit of due diligence internally. There is quite a clear mapping between the two. The extent to which, to be clear, TCF satisfies the new Consumer Duty, I think, is a bit of an open question. I think the bar is a little higher. We also need to remind ourselves that the political classes were actively considering a duty of care, which would have been a degree of magnitude more challenging and would also potentially have introduced an opportunity for litigation, which meant actually there'd be a double jeopardy through the courts as well as through the regulators. I guess the challenge, however, in the Consumer Duty at this stage is less about its provenance and its content, but more about its application to the tight deadlines, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that.
Excellent. I think you're absolutely right about that kind of political dynamic as well at place. I think we are all probably aware that there are kind of 4 outcomes that the FCA is looking at, and I know that they should be equally balanced and equally weighted. I think personally, I think ensuring that the product meets the needs of the customer is probably the foundation. I think it's foundational. And at the core of that has obviously got to be understanding the customer, and surely part of that is data. So coming to you, Robert, I just wonder about what you've been doing in terms of helping people to prepare for the Consumer Duty, and what are kind of the questions that people are asking you?
Yeah. So it's obviously an important area for all of financial services. So certainly within Equifax, you're right, data is our champion. So understanding the customer, so helping clients go, who are the customers you're looking for, what are you trying to do with them, can we support you in that regard? So in part, it's providing a degree of consultancy and really pointed towards our existing product suite, which is already directed towards doing the right thing for customers. It's one of our internal values, do the right thing, customers first, and kind of building on that. So we have spent time making sure that our raw data that we get in is of good quality. The characteristics that we create are also doing the right thing, and then the scores, the modelling of those and the performance of those. The important part, I suppose, is at the back end of that, we're supporting our clients making the end decision for their consumer. So we're a part of the journey. We don't give them the final decision necessarily. It's for that client to take our products or services and then apply them in the best way to meet their own product needs. So what we're seeing is some clients are now contacting us to say, how are you, Equifax, meeting your obligations for consumer duty? That's literally just starting, despite the fact that it's been going on for a while. And then, so we will have to go through that process. But the timelines are pressing, as you're suggesting. But no, those are the areas that we are seeing. It is the products we have. We're not created a product for consumer duty because really you can't. It's looking at things like vulnerability, affordability. Those are our strengths, and saying, how can we help our customers get the right outcomes for their customers? So that's the part that we're playing.
And you've mentioned about the level of contact. Are you getting the contact that you expected, I guess?
We're getting some contact. Certainly it's a subject that we pick up in our monthly, quarterly business reviews with our clients. We've been talking about consumer duty. I would say they're all at different stages of that. Some have got, we were talking about this offline, massive projects, some are relatively small projects. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, I would suggest at this moment.
I'll come on to Desmond, because you're at the kind of sharp edge of this in terms of, I mean, we talked a few months ago, I think it was at the Lending Summit, and we talked about your model and you talked about your involvement with the FCA. I think probably slightly different to some other people in your market, but that means that you're at the heart of this in terms of preparing for the consumer duty. I mean, what have you seen in terms, as you've been going through that implementation, what have you seen in terms of challenges or surprises? Is there anything that you could share in terms of those insights?
So I suppose one of the things I started with and was nervous about, would people think about more broadly? So for instance, if we look at one of the verticals of customer understanding, we had an Exco champion who led that, but what we wanted to make sure was that they didn't just think about, did the customers understand, let's say, the marketing pitch or the website, the app, but did they understand everything that we do, in every macro we respond, in all interactions, and how do we sort of cut across maybe historical boundaries of responsibility? Because we wanted to make sure we had a holistic view of customer understanding, not just when they signed up or when they used us, but did they understand repayments, did they understand delinquency, did they understand all of the messages we sent them? And what I've been really impressed by is actually people are really been engaged in doing that. And so they've taken the four outcomes and driven them across the parts of the firm, even if it wasn't a part of the firm that they were maybe responsible for in the past. Now, one of the challenges, I think, is that whilst we can do a lot of work on things like on customer understanding of certain aspects, we all agree, I think, that there's quite a lot that needs to be done on contractual information and regulatory contractual information as well. So one of the challenges that the FCA have is that some of the most hard to understand parts of our information that we give customers is sometimes the formal contractual information that we have to under legislation. So we're super looking forward to helping the FCA evolve that as well, because the two things combined, I think, will make consumer duty even better. So I think there's quite a lot that we have to do, and I think there's quite a lot that the FCA can help us do with the evolution of pre-contractual and contractual information.
Okay, that makes sense. And I mean, I think what we're seeing is that everybody's looking at that entire journey and looking at the various outcomes across the journey. I am going to ask this question that's getting the most votes around in 5 years' time, but I'll come back to that because I think that's looking ahead a little bit further down the track. I think one of the questions that we have here is industry really ready for the deadlines? And there is a deadline at the end, the 31st of July, but there's a deadline just a few days away as well in terms of the transfer and the exchange of information as well. So I'm just wondering, have firms been able to meet that challenge? Eric, I'll come to you on that. Will they be able to meet that challenge?
So I think the first point would be that in project terms, we're looking at a deadline for operationalisation, but actually the consumer duty is going to be with us beyond 31st July, and there are requirements on back books that take us through into the next year. There'll inevitably be remedials, change requirements, etc., that take the front book into 23, 24 as well. So I think substantively ready, yes. across the industry. It's for the supervisory teams at the FCA to determine whether the readiness from firm to firm is adequate or not. Then I think what we'll see is a process of evolution within firms as the familiarity and the further embedding of the consumer duty starts to permeate through to new product design, starts to influence different utilisation of channel, adoption of different digital technologies, etc. So I wouldn't say that 31st July is the finish line. In a lot of ways, and I know it's a little trite, it's probably more like a start line.
Yeah, we kind of heard that from Rob McKechnie this morning, where she talked about this idea that we should focus on the areas of risk and kind of make sure that those are dealt with as quickly as possible. I think the same question to you, Robert, in terms of from what you're seeing with your engagement. Do you think people are going to be ready?
I'm going to agree with what Eric said. I think there are different organisations at different places in their journey. That's probably the sum and substance of it. Some have dug right into the detail and are kind of revamping, rewriting, re-preparing. I think for a lot of businesses, it probably should be just more of the same, as in that they were already doing it. However, it's been able to evidence and show that this product meets these requirements. As you say, clients understand it. And how can they point to that and say it's okay? I think substantively, as you said already, they're going to be ready. But I agree it is the start line. There's more to be done. And I think certainly from our perspective, there's more that we can help and offer for those clients that want to come in and support. They need that support.
I'm not going to ask you to talk about competitors because that would get you into trouble, I'm sure. But I mean, is there a particular part of the consumer duty that isn't? I think that it says here are there areas of consumer duty that's not getting attention? Are you, from talking within the industry, from talking to others, I'm sure. Do you think there's areas that are just not getting the attention they should?
I think one of the, whether it's across the industry, I think really complaints and the concept of complaints have generally been seen as an issue to do with customer service. Whereas actually going forward, complaints are much more to do with all four pillars of the consumer duty outcomes. And if you've probably had your customer service teams leading the activity on that outcome, they will understand the whole element of root cause analysis and reporting back of complaints analysis. But I would wonder whether your consumer understanding lead has talked to the head of complaints and really created a framework where they would be informed and escalated. And so we have to get away from the idea that complaints are operations, but complaints are now going to be more broadly. And I don't think everyone has totally got that. Yeah. And the more that feeds in, then you've got four obvious pillars which are being supported by a complaints process across. So I think that's the area that has had a little bit less.
Any of the other panellists? Eric, I'll come to...
I think there's the unspoken element, which is the HR and cultural point, where the FCA has been increasingly interested, particularly amongst the fixed supervisory firms. And actually, when one goes back to ultimately the only two sources of truth, the finalised guidance and the policy statement, actually it's quite light touch. It was very interesting, the earlier panel session in this room discussing ESG. So much of it is about embedding the philosophy and getting the culture right. And to the point around customer service, complaints, ops, culturally, are we thinking about challenges, issues our clients face in the right way? That's the bit where the business, I guess, derives benefit through NPS, etc., because the recovery process is because you haven't siloed issues such as customer service and complaints.
Does that prompt anything from anybody else around culture?
I think part of it for me is everyone's focusing on the back book of all their existing products. Are they fit for purpose? Are they doing the right job? Do customers understand them? Is the marketing material clear? Are sales staff selling it the right way? There's all that, which is fine, but then there's also that you're developing new products. How do you layer in the requirements of consumer duty with all new builds? And I think people are probably focused and worried about old. They've got to also recognise it's what they bring into new, and it just becomes BAU, business as usual. This is how we do it. And therefore, for us, certainly, we're doing a bit more work on voice of customer, understanding need to make sure that when we create a product, deliver it out, it satisfies our client needs, and it helps meet the end consumer's outcomes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of part of what we're looking to focus on.
And Des, I don't want to derail a conversation on the consumer duty, but you've already mentioned some of the regulatory changes, the other regulatory changes that are going on around the Consumer Credit Act and the regulation around buy now, pay later as well. And that's, you know, been led by Treasury, moving towards the FCA. I mean, do you, you know, the suggestion here, the question here is, will that have a bigger impact than the consumer duties? I'm going to come to you.
I don't know whether it will have a bigger impact, but the challenge we all have is that we're implementing consumer duty to create a common language to educate our customers using contractual information which was written in 1974. Okay, so, and that documentation is going to be evolved over the next 2 years. It would be lovely if we had already had that evolved, because then we could all speak with the same language and consumers would understand, you know, the definitions and terms everywhere. And the scope of regulation is broadening so that, you know, those people who are not regulated under buy now, pay later are going to come under scope. That also helps because then you don't have this mismatch of who's Section 75, who's not Section 75, and which just creates confusion. Mm-hmm. So I think CCA, it would have been lovely to have had CCA before we did consumer duty. I understand why we haven't, but getting it done very, very quickly, I think, helps enormously for creating a common language so customers would see the same sort of information in the same sorts of way that were appropriate. Whereas at the moment, we're all having to sort of figure out how to do that. And then, by the way, adding a 21-page contract information, which, to be honest, you probably don't understand. So I think it will help enormously.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's a separate project away from consumer duty, but UK Finance, Equifax, have you been looking at what might happen in these areas as well? I'm guessing you will have. Been working away on this, Robert, and then Eric.
So we've, again, working away at is probably a stronger statement.
Yeah.
We're aware of the initiative and we are starting to engage on it, but we've been focusing in on consumer duty and also credit industry market study,
yes,
which is another one that's going to take a lot of our time and effort over the coming years. And we do see that those kind of all joining up and being part of a bigger outlook. But no, because the CCA changes, I agree with what's been said again, which is it's a change, it's needed. We're looking at old legislation, certainly from our perspective in the debt services business as well, having that clarity and customers know what they're buying into is going to be integral moving forward in the sector. But we've not picked up anything like that, because for us it's really how our lenders report to us, what are they going to report and what changes does that mean, and that's why I'm pushing it into the SIMS element, market study, because that's all going to have to come together.
Let's not get into the market study.
No.
As a member of SCORE, I'm scarred by all of that. Eric, any last? Yeah,
look, you know, if we take a step back and if we think a little bit about why there is legislation and regulation, and typically, without wanting to get too theorist about these things, that is because there is a failure in the marketplace. Now, you know, CCA was enacted in 1974. It went through, I think, 3 different governments in the 70s before being enacted. Was actually a response to the Krauser report in 1968. Are we really saying that the same imperfections in a market in 1968 hold true in 2023 with all of the innovation and technological development? I really don't think that holds water. I guess the opportunity is to shape the legislation around the consumer duty regulation. Otherwise, you dilute the value of the consumer duty, because, you know, we've all probably assiduously read that bit which says, you know what, the consumer duty is subordinate to legislation, so get CCA wrong or retain some of its flaws and you undermine the value of the consumer duty itself.
There's a question that's come to the top here. I'm not, as the Chief Executive of a trade association that represents high-cost lenders, I'm not exactly sure who's relevant for this particular question. What should firms do if their consumers are on higher interest products, if they believe those consumers would pass credit checks for products with lower rates? I had a similar session with my members yesterday, which was an hour long. You can imagine that this is one of the questions that came up there. There was a conversation about target markets and things like that. I don't know if anybody wants to try and answer that, but...
Well, I'll give it that one a go. I mean, I work for a company which doesn't charge any interest at all, so we're we're obviously against any concept of interest.
Yeah.
So any interest is bad. I think people need to. I think there are two angles to this. One, which is, if a customer has improved in their quality and you would offer them a different product now if they apply it today, I think you have a requirement to offer them that updated product. It can't be that they stick on a product which they took 5 years ago and they've changed their financial position. The other offset of that is, I'm not quite sure how firms who are offering products which are teasers into other products which actually make them money are going to work going forward. So the flip side of it is the balance transfer market, which really only makes money if you then go on to Revolver. I'm very interested to see how providers of balance transfers are going to get that to work.
Yeah, I think we've got 5 minutes left. That's an hour in itself, I think. I did say I was going to come back to, where are we going to be in the we talk about treating customers fairly, we talk about consumer duty. I mean, is this going to be in place in 5 years' time, which was one of the questions earlier on? I mean, do we think, Eric, you were kind of saying the deadline is there, but this is going to be with us for a while. Do we think that this is something that is going to be here for the next 5 years, 10 years?
So the first question I might ask myself is, of all the FCA regulation, since inception of the FSA, how much has been repealed? Mm-hmm. And that might give me something of an answer. I would probably frame the question along the lines of, in 5 years' time, in what form will the consumer duty exist? How will it evolve? I wouldn't see this as a question of some future repeal.
Any other comments?
No, again, I'm going to sound like I'm agreeing a lot. But I think it's something that will continue to evolve. I think with all regulations, they put it out, we work to it, they then come and check, see what's working, what's not, and then it gets improved, adjusted in line with the way the market's going. I mean, okay, 1974 for the Consumer Credit Act and where we are now, the world's moved on a lot. And it's moving on very, very quickly. I don't think it's going to be in its current guise, but yes, something of this order will continue to exist.
Still looking ahead, I think the question here in the panel's view, what material changes do you see providers making to products to meet the consumer duty requirements? I think that's a great question to end on. I know we've only got 3 or 4 minutes, but each of the panelists, what changes do you think we're going to see? Des, can I start with you, Desmond?
I think customer service is probably the area that will see the biggest improvement, because I think it's the one, the industry as a whole is seen as having a poor level of customer service. And I think that's the one where we have the most opportunity to improve that. Now, you might achieve that by having cleaner products, clearer products that people can self-serve, and you can do it a number of different ways. But then effectively, the people who are coming to you and have a problem are telling you your product's not working and they need to fix it. So I think if we nail that part of it, then I think there's been a huge benefit from doing all this.
Robert, from your perspective, what do you think?
Yeah, I think transparency. So customer knows what they've bought, what it was going to do, and then you have no debates about, I didn't really understand that. It's that clarity that's needed. I don't think anyone's selling really. Well, there are complex products out there, so how do you break it down so that from the top-end professors to the normal man in the street, if there is that discrimination, how do they all have that clarity and understanding of, that works for me, that's the right product, and I'm happy. But then, as you say, how, when their circumstances change, can things adjust with that customer? And
the FCA does talk a lot about transparency, and even when it comes to price and value and things like that, I think there's going to be more and more transparency about how do you come up with your price. And I think more of that will be going out, and I know that includes costs, includes brokers' fees, if that's your model, and things like that. So I think there's definitely more transparency going. That's certainly the path we're going down. I mean, Eric, what do you see?
There's a law of diminishing returns when you're end of the session at the end of the panel, etc. But I guess there's probably two things for me. One, I think there will be a far better understanding of the customer journey. And I say that not from the supply side, because I think there's a number of significant experts and expertise in this room, but from the demand side. So customer journey as opposed to provider understanding of customer journey. I think that's really important, actually, and probably the point on which to end this session, because ultimately it is about a customer duty.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I've just got a minute left, so I'm just going to kind of close it there because I think that's probably the best place to end it, and to thank the panelists for taking part and for answering the questions. And thank you for the audience for coming up. I mean, Slido, sometimes I've been to events where it's been hard to get questions coming up, but we've had some great questions, and we've still got questions there that we could have answered if we'd had more time. A suggestion maybe to credit strategy that we kind of expand some of these panels, because I think 25 minutes to deal with consumer duty is tough. But if I could just thank my panelists and ask the audience to join me in thanking them. Thank you.